Good day, all you Liberty lovers, and welcome to Fiendish Friends, episode 11, when we have a legend of the Bitcoin Cash ecosystem, Jason Dreyzehner, joining us to talk about his proposed chips and developments, including, and I've got to take a big breath right now to get this all out, OP Eval, Paytoscript, loops as well. Not only that, but the fresh off the press proposed chip transaction version 5. And this includes many things, including zero overhead covenants, detached signatures, comprehensive malleability protection, efficient covenant UTXO recycling, fractional satoshis, and fractional cash tokens. Wow, someone's been a busy beaver. Hi, Jason. Welcome to Fiendish and Friends. It's a privilege to have you join us today.
Thank you for the intro. I'll try not to let it go to my head.
Yeah, to be honest, it's been great seeing this because you just locked in big ints and uh, um, the virtual machine limits upgrade, and no, pretty much just what is it? A few weeks after that, you come in and with some new chips. So no pause to the wicked. By the way, I was actually looking at my notes. The last time we were on a podcast together was way back in 2022. So that was when we were discussing the cash tokens upgrade. Which was, yeah, of course, another one of your chips. I guess everyone in the Bitcoin Cash ecosystem is well aware of cash tokens now. Yeah, so anyway, before we start delving into the weeds, as this is your first time on Fiendish and Friends, and to ensure that everyone out there knows exactly who you are, it'd be great to have an introduction. So, Jason, maybe you could just tell everyone who are you, what do you do, and why all this incredible work towards Bitcoin Cash.
Thanks. Yeah, I've been working on. I came to Bitcoin for the freedom. I've been working on professionally on Bitcoin Cash since 2013. I was at BitPay from 2013 to 2019, and I've been working on protocol improvements necessary to make some uh, exciting uh, on-chain applications possible since then.
Yeah, cool. So you've been around for a long time.
It's been a while.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and as I said, so Cash Tokens was the last time we did a podcast together on the space together, and this was one of the more hyped upgrades of BCH's history. So just as a reflection, to begin with, how have you personally found the results of Cash Tokens on the ecosystem since the upgrade in 2023?
Um, Yeah, it's going well. There's a ton of work to do, and in a lot of ways, catch up to do with many of the other popular layer one networks that in some cases were able to launch with token support, and many of the applications that we consider to be very common in the space were designed, for example, on Ethereum because Ethereum was the only player in town to do interesting on-chain protocols for a while. Um, and as we sort of discovered it over the past few years, um, that was a result almost entirely of some some rather silly virtual machine limits that got reduced in 2010, and essentially no progress was made on them until very recently. So cash tokens was a good way to make a lot of financial applications very efficient, where we can express a lot of financial applications in very short transactions, and they're very quick to validate. Um, and they're useful for representing a lot of things. Um, but then there are also some other virtual machine limits that made it very difficult to do even pretty trivial computations, like doing the math for a market making algorithm, just calculating based on how much BCH you have and how many tokens you have, what the new price should be. that was difficult to do, even though that's microseconds on a processor, right? Or significantly less than that. I'm using the
Sure.
um, so getting VM limits fixed up this year really opens up the space a lot for some of the other issues that have been sort of on hold since 2010 in a lot of ways. So Satoshi's original virtual machine, Satoshi's original Bitcoin system had a very, very capable virtual machine, the script system that um, essentially right out of the gate would have supported anything you've seen on any cryptocurrency for sure. Its issues were that it was a very academic approach to the problem, and he had essentially just missed a very obvious uh, set of exploits that he by in taking a very academic approach, he basically tried to make the virtual machine work without any limits by making it not Turing complete. And so he didn't add any limits, and he kind of told himself that that was sufficient because it's not Turing complete. But of course, the real world operates on computers that exist in reality, and those computers have limited things like limited memory, limited compute. Um, so he discovered it very suddenly, like more than a year after the protocol had been launched and was in production. Like people were using Bitcoin, just transactions back and forth to each other. Um, they were essentially for about a year and a half before on the Bitcoin talk forums, Gavin asks, "Hey, what's this script thing?" And you can see that the wheels turning very quickly. You see, like within 8 hours, it's really clear that Satoshi like hadn't looked at it in a little while, and he's on this protocol hardening kick. And he looks at the script system again, and he's like, "Oh God, there's a lot we need to fix here."
I guess we
and
were just lucky at that point that it wasn't really used very much, because I guess if you were to release something in that state today as it was, it's just going to be, it's
Oh
going to be
yeah.
attacked straight away.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, like it was possible. I mean, there were 0 days to take anyone's money from any address, but like you could just put op return in and get anybody's money out of any address without providing a signature. I mean, there are
Oh,
just a
that
lot of
sounds good.
yeah. And
That's a good basis of a money
there,
system. Hey,
there are
why do
all
we
sorts of
like
yeah.
that?
And in some ways, it's an indicator that whoever was working on the script system at least was probably a single brain, because they didn't talk about it with another person very much, or they
Oh,
probably
that's
would
an
have
interesting
between
point.
each other like penetrated some of the issues here.
So
Um,
Satoshi was one person then, from your
at
perspective.
least whoever was working on the script system was definitely one person, and they didn't explain
Uh,
it to anybody else. Um, yeah, so or they didn't explain it to anybody else who was technically in the details. Um,
cool.
the But yeah, so then fast forward a number of years, Satoshi, or I'll say, so in 2010 or I guess is it 2011? Wow, yeah, no, it's 2010. Yeah, 2010, because he disappears at the end of 2010. Um,
That's right. Yeah,
well, I'm a little, I'm actually not sure. I
it's
have
a
to
long
check.
time ago
That's all
now.
right. I'll look later. I'm not fresh for sure on this stuff. But he then rapidly makes a bunch of patches. The first of which, the first is like just a massive overhaul, and then another massive overhaul comes like literally 3 days later. And then like another week later, there's some other massive changes, and he's disabling stuff and cutting stuff and setting magic numbers for various constant limits. Just absolutely shredding it. And and over I think there are like 6 or 7 non-trivial consensus changes. He schedules the first soft fork, and then once it's done, he cleans it up by removing the logic from before because it's not necessary. It applies right over it. The He adds the op nop codes, the 201 opcode limit. There's a number of things there,
Mm.
and then he disappears at the end of the year, and all progress and in a lot of ways even interest in this mostly fades. It pops back up a little bit again in 2012 with people talking about op eval, which eventually became uh, Paytoscript hash.
Mm.
But for the most part, people were interested in use cases essentially that let people give out addresses that had multi-signature conditions. And so being able to support multi-signature wallets. And coincidentally, that is when I started working on Bitcoin Cash, and I worked at BitPay on the first multi-signature wallet, Copay. I led the design of Copay at that time. Um, being one of the only designers with a team of a few designers also. Um, uh, then the multi-sig stuff finally being possible after P2SH probably attracted some more interest to the script system. But then the block size war essentially stopped all development in this field
Mm.
until 2017. 2018, we got a lot of opcodes reintroduced. There's probably a few other, yeah. Then there's check data sig happened in 2019. 2022 we got introspection. 2023 cache tokens finally opened back up general computation on the virtual machine, though with very uh, low limits, and so you had to do quite a few workarounds to get a lot of useful stuff done. There are a lot of things you could already do even just with cache tokens, because you can express things pretty efficiently for some financial applications. Um, but if you start having to do serious math, you have to break out your computations into multiple inputs, and essentially that's where things get purely theoretical, because very few people even really comprehend how to break apart the problem. Not uh, certainly not enough to build user facing real world usable applications using it.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And I guess this is where the big ink comes in for the upgrade that's locked this May.
yes, and the virtual machine limit. So that,
Yeah.
this is the virtual VM limits was a huge unlock that was preventing a lot of otherwise quite simple improvements to our virtual machine, how we can express programs, simply because uh, before we basically didn't have limits before, except for some magic constants that applied at different places, and were relative based on the encoding format. Our virtual machine limits only were only implicitly defined, and the encoding format of the transaction was an important part of what the actual limits were. And it's kind of insane to even describe it that way. Like to know what the worst case performance of the virtual machine was with maximum size blocks producing the maximum compute transactions, you had to account for how many bytes they would take to encode, and then apply your magic constants in the right spots to figure out what the actual limits were. And so that was the work for last year, was like just observing our system sufficiently to see where all of our limits were, and then putting explicit limits in those spots. um, and that was a just a gargantuan task that is, thank God, finally done. Um, and so there are a lot of other things now that with explicit limits now, there's no program that can be defined in Bitcoin Cash's VM bytecode format. There's no program that can be defined that way without um, that is not covered by the explicit limits, and it's very obviously and directly applied. There's nothing you can do that doesn't exhaust some limit. Um, Even pushing data, which there are a number of things that, when you first look at the problem, it's really easy to be like, okay, we don't need any limits over that. But if you don't do it very comprehensively, you start to run into issues the moment you start to talk about, like, okay, can we make our fourth our fourth, the VM bytecode language, can we make it do loops? Can we make it do function application? Um, can we reallow Paytoscript instead of just Paytoscript hash? And a number of other things. And the VM limits chip talks at length about all of the essentially every other proposal about which we knew that has ever been made. We wanted to make sure that the explicit limits we had identified would also work, even if we did need to make a small change here that allowed control flow to loop back over one part of the program, or if we added switch statements, or if we did OP Eval or things like that. So Yes, the virtual machine limit upgrade for the 2025 upgrade makes the previously implicit limits very explicit, and it applies them completely, comprehensively to every byte you can possibly execute in the virtual machine. And that's the critical thing to understand. So um, once you have VM
Sorry,
limits,
let's just get back to that point because I'm just
yeah.
thinking for people that are listening, if it wasn't explicitly limited, what's the outcome? Like, what's that? Why is that good, or why is the opposite of that bad or dangerous?
So the uh, we know that the state it was in before, by definition, it wasn't dangerous because that's how it was working. So we know that that was safe, right?
At least we
But
hope
so
so.
I
It's
wouldn't,
been
yeah.
working so far so well.
But the question is like, what can you change
Hmm.
while like what kind of improvements can you make without totally deleting that safety guarantee, right? And OP
Right.
Eval is the oldest, most ancient example. You cannot make any changes. I'll say even this maybe will be a good indication of just how delicate it was before. I don't think many people really understood that changing the minimum transaction size amounted to a 2x, almost 2x increase in the worst case performance of the virtual machine.
Hmm.
Because the limits were implicit. So, the worst case attack before was 100 byte transactions, and the new worst case was 65 byte transactions. And so you get and you get an almost 50% increase in the worst case
Hmm.
standard. So this is also in the mempool, not just like a miner has to mine an attack block. This was you know yeah, in place on the live network. Um, so implicit limits are just a terrible idea. And they bleed and leak out their problems over every other possible improvement to the protocol. And they make it really hard to even reason about uh, what happens if you add support for loops, or what happens if you add support for function definition, um, which op eval is a way to do function definition. Um, so things that you come to expect, things that you would expect of any programming language, we don't have because of essentially a vestige of Satoshi's original kind of half-baked approach to limits. And when he ripped all of that out, he didn't remove this comment at the top of the script interpreter that said the script system has no loops, even though that was no longer his limit strategy. It was not relevant at all to the code below it. But he didn't delete it, so it like misled this whole maybe 6 to 9 years of new developers who read that who read that code, just accepted sorry, read that comment, just accepted it kind of you know without critical thought. And it defined the what people came to understand, came to believe about the script system, being people believed that being not Turing complete was an important property. Not just that, like, being, the whole discussion about Turing completeness was just completely useless. Completely a red herring. It did not matter at all whether or not it was Turing complete. All that mattered is what actually happens when you validate a transaction, and whether or not the encoding you're using happens to be Turing complete, or if it terminates because you have limits somewhere else, and you just expressed it less efficiently. So either one is the same result. It's either you either can express or not a use case, and it either fails early or it doesn't. Um, but anyways, once we got getting past the VM limits upgrade for 2025, it's now possible for us to look at um, some of these big issues for contract authors. Like right now, we cannot reliably say check all of the input values and add them together. There's not a reliable way to say that. That you have to, instead of like saying, hey, loop through all the inputs and add them together, you have to say, if there's one input, add the value of input one. If there are two inputs, add the value of input one and two. If there are
Oh
three
wow,
inputs,
that
add the input of value one, two, and three. And
yeah.
I'm not kidding. Like it is truly absurd. Just a joke that you wouldn't even consider writing in a programming language that looked like this if it wasn't Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash. But we've had kind of a decade of kind of stagnation on the development there. And people were really making do, and we are still making do. A lot of contracts in Bitcoin Cash right now are still making do without loops. And it gets there are other cases where so that's the case for loops. For OP Eval, the we can use the very same case if you need to. Um, take the average of two numbers or something and add it to each input. I mean, like just some sort of run some sort of mathematical function on each input. Well, now you need to, if there's one input, check the input value here, and then specify all your code for the mathematical function. And if there are two inputs, grab the input one and grab input two, and specify all the mathematical code for input one, and specify all the mathematical code for input two, and add them together, whatever. If there are three inputs, do the same thing for input one, input two, input three, and also you have copied and pasted your mathematical code 6 times now, right? It's factorial increase in the size of the program, and that's just for
So
one function application. Now, if you start if you do a function that needs to call another function, even if it's just a little bit of some very simple math, you are duplicating that interior function, 6 times the outside the
Jason,
testing.
you still there you go. You're back.
my time limit my time limit went off for X. All right.
That's so funny. I actually, do you know what? Just before this,
Ignored for
because
today.
last time I did the same thing, I was kicked out because the time limit went off. I have a strict 15-minute time limit of X per day that I'm
Nice.
always skipping, but it's to try and control the X usage. But yeah, sorry, please
Yeah.
carry on.
Um, so there again, so function application and loops are both like, I mean, you would laugh if somebody tried to introduce you to a programming language that didn't allow you to specify a subroutine as a function and call it multiple times, or didn't allow you to like loop over the number of inputs and check them for something. Um, these are very, very basic things, and and mind you, our virtual machine is based on the fourth programming language. So the constructs we're talking about are 50 years old or more. The loops um, proposal is proposing one of the loop constructions that is common to most fourth implementations: op begin, op until. It's I think from the 70s, 1970s, and it's very standard. You can actually ask a large language model to write an implementation of something, and then be like, "Oh, a Bitcoin Cash added op begin op until, fix this," and it will actually give you the correct result because it's trained on lots of fourth code. So it's useful to have to just add the thing that most fourths use. So that's the loops proposal. Um, the op eval is a very similar thing. Um, there are different ways you can add support for function definition. If you're curious, there's some discussion in the Bitcoin Cash Research Forum about kind of the different approaches we could take and what their trade-offs are. But in short, op eval is sort of the very simplest thing we could possibly do that we can prove has a set of use cases for which it will always be the most optimal. And so it's it's very easy to, and the reason I am interested in it versus like trying to bike shed out a specific way to define functions and let users define unspecified opcodes or something like that. Like there are large bike sheds that could be painted, but we don't necessarily need to, because we can prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that op eval is the most optimal way to do the thing that it does for a very large set of use cases, for the first application and for the last application of any function. Um, so and let me go back, because there's probably an unstated thing there, that when looking at protocol upgrades, we always want to find ways to make the protocol just timeless. Like the protocol should not be changed to make something a little bit more convenient right now, even if we might find a better solution later. Like that is not the level of rigor required for a protocol change. If our grandchildren are going to have to deal with the mistakes we make now, then we want to be absolutely sure that, to the very best of our ability, every change we possibly make will be perfect as far as we can see into the future. Um,
Yeah, definitely. And this is the critical thing, right? Because I'm very well aware of your vision of Bitcoin Cash, and we'll go into that later. But really looking into setting this network up to be money for the world, so the world reserve, a currency that every single person on the planet can use daily as cash. And of course, something like that doesn't happen overnight. It takes time to snowball. At a certain time, it can hit a critical mass and explode. That's true, but still, if you're building something that's designed for the world, this isn't something that's to achieve that. You're not going to be replacing it then a few weeks later, right, with something else. So everything that's happening now, everything that's being built, is incredibly important. Which is why the chip process on Bitcoin Cash is for, the greatest consensus model we've got right now, and it is that there's we've got a lot of this work, and I know you're highly respected within the community, have a lot of regard. And nevertheless, even though you have already proved yourself in the ecosystem, when a new chip comes out, of course, people get excited, especially non-technical people like myself, and I'm not a developer. But nevertheless, those chips are taken and they're ripped apart, and they're analyzed, they're criticized, and rightfully so, because this is important.
yep.
And we want to make sure that we get this right. And I'm just thinking about cash tokens. Of course, this is a great addition to the BCH ecosystem. But I remember, the very first time I read about this was PM Prediction Markets version 3.
Yep.
Which, of course, then if you think about the same thing happened, ripped apart, criticized,
Yep.
and what came out of that was, of course, much better. So, Jason, like, just because you're talking about op eval, and yeah, be really good to focus in on this one and zone in this one, just thinking about the consensus. So the feedback that I've heard expressed by some BCH developers is that from their perspective, the benefits are limited, but it brings a lot of risk. And just looking at the op eval, there's a great mention of it from Mike Hearn on bitcointalk.org in October the 7th, 2011. And there, he also expresses risk here, and I'm just going to give this quotation. I would love to hear, like how you would counter that. So this is a quote from Mike Hearn, 2011.
Yeah.
The current Bitcoin design has been carefully reviewed and found to be strong. People like Kaminsky have tried their best and not discovered any issues. Major structural design changes like op eval invalidate all those assurances and put Bitcoin back at square one. I'm not seeing the benefit. This space is cheap, and pruning would reclaim far more than shrinking transactions by a small amount. Lightweight clients don't even care. So this is a long time ago, and the world's moved on from there. But there's pretty, like, just taking that statement
Yeah.
as it is. It's a pretty, like, damning assessment of op eval. What would your chat? How would you answer that if that was being said by Mike today?
Yeah. Well, and first, as you're saying there, but he did not have the information we have now, and he was definitely right in 20. I think that was 2011, maybe it was 2012.
Yeah, 2011.
2011. Um,
Yep.
and he was definitely right in 2011. And I should even go back and say that Satoshi made a huge number of just incredibly prescient decisions. Like it I I'm continuously surprised at how good of a choice it was to base our virtual machine on Forth. Um, like it may be because Forth is not something that sort of my generation of programmers grew up on a little bit, and so I feel like I'm in a lot of ways discovering lost ancient knowledge. But he really did pick the right tool for the job in expressing virtual machine contracts, because we can actually get quite a bit more concise code if it's expressed in Forth than if we, for example, implemented something. If we had WebAssembly was our virtual machine system, um, it would be significantly less concise and for no performance benefit. And people have not thought through these problems. They just assume they're like, oh, WebAssembly's fast, throw it in there. That's the right thing to use. But like, you are throwing away 50 years of computing knowledge. Um, um, so there, I want to be really clear that I would not judge any of the opinions from before 2013. By any of our standards now. We know so much more about what could be useful in our programming model, like what kinds of applications people are going to want to build. They're not if you read through that Bitcoin Talk forum post, they're not even thinking about things like loan protocols. And I mean, there's some sense of like, hey, we could eventually tokenize all the things and then decentralize exchanges, but that's like where it ends.
Mm.
There's certainly no one there considering that it will be practical at some point in the future to implement zero knowledge proofs using the contract system. Like there's just a foregone conclusion that it will be an opcode. And I too bought that foregone conclusion until like within the past 2 years, for sure. Even last year, I was surprised to notice how practical it could be to implement something like Zcash's Halo 2 um, zero knowledge proof construction stuff in Bitcoin Cash as a covenant. Like that would have been, if you had told me that in 2021, I would have just laughed at you. But like, for sure, it's viable in the contract system, and it can be expressed pretty concisely. Um, the the you do lose, like, if we're talking about performance, you do lose some overhead on the actual kind of manipulating bytes in lots of ways. But for the long tail of various use cases out there, it would be really, really, really hard to beat Satoshi's idea that giving people a virtual machine that they can work with, that the system is protected itself from people making silly programs, but people are able to just permissionlessly go off and build what they want to build. We can actually get shockingly good performance out of it, and you can build even crypto applications in this virtual machine system, and they're pretty darn good. And they also scale really well because the a lot of the biggest issue with scaling is not compute, it's bandwidth. Compute, we've got a ceiling, we've got a safety margin of 10 to 100x right now. A completely normal consumer device should be able to handle the worst case scenarios using less than 10% of their compute power. Um, Validating the Bitcoin Cash network. So that's very normal consumer hardware, and it gets better every year. So we're in a really good spot there. Our problem is not compute speed; it is simply bandwidth. It is simply how many bytes it takes to express things.
Mm.
Um, so that's what, if anything, when I've kind of harped on, all right, I've given privacy privacy applications as an example for some of this stuff because it's something really tangible that people can understand quickly. And I think hopefully it helps to kind of break the misconceptions around what is reasonable to do in the VM bytecode. It is reasonable to do crypto in the VM bytecode, and not in like the way that uh, earlier iterations of sort of the BSV ecosystem would talk about, like, oh, we can do signature checking in the script. You just have to add these 3 MB of code or whatever it was. Like, we can do it really efficiently. They can be small atomic transactions that don't look much different than a multi-signature transaction. Like, people need to really understand that, like, the there are there are relatively straightforward optimizations that can be made to get our contract system to a place where you can implement anything that is being done by any layer one coin out there. You can do it on Bitcoin Cash as a covenant. And you can do it with the same efficiency that is being done by those layer one networks. Like, if you specifically designed a transaction format to be as efficient as possible to do a zero knowledge shielded transaction, the total number of bytes taken up by that transaction will be very similar to the optimized version of a Bitcoin Cash covenant.
Yeah,
Um,
and for me, this that all sounds, for me, that sounds incredibly important when we're at that sort of your bandwidth layer. So if we're really pushing forward, maybe we're heading towards our first 100 million or a billion. What interests me today is, though, like, just thinking about like the realities of Bitcoin Cash today, where we have now with Abla, we have this adjustable block size. But we're still, the average block size, I don't know what it is, if it's 200K or 100K, but it's basically, so currently the throughput is not the bottleneck today. Of course, I know you're looking ahead in the future. But just at the realisms
um,
today, what benefits? So basically, so at the moment, of course, all that transaction size is also a subsidy paid through for the miners for actually using up that block space. So if we made that efficiency more efficient today with such low transaction volume, could it not also? So what I also see as the impact of that is that the block size is smaller. Now, of course, it's more efficient. That's all great when you've got the transactions, but in today's reality, I can see there sort of some of the negative sides to that. But the benefits then come later on. So my question would be, why implement this now as opposed to later on, when it's actually looking like, oh, okay, this is on the horizon now that this efficiency and bandwidth is required.
yeah. Yeah. So, like, if I understand the question correctly, why make transactions more efficient when our blocks aren't full and we want to get more data in the blocks to pay the subsidy?
Today is the
Yes.
question. Yeah, so of course I see the benefits of that,
Yeah.
um
And that
but
is,
just not today.
yeah. And that is the argument that is driving BTC today. The argument that drives BTC today is that we want to, maximize the transaction fees in the immediate term, with uh, ignoring the availability of alternatives and substitute products. And um and so, as many people in Bitcoin Cash have discovered, obviously, that there are use cases that are prevented if you require large transaction fees for the use case. Like, you're going to choose to use a different system other than Bitcoin Cash if your per transaction cost is non-negligible. Basically, if your per transaction cost is like more than $1, you're thinking about ways you can switch to another system that doesn't cost you so much. And
Sure.
this was just like the critical and obvious flaw in the whole. We're going to make every transaction cost $1,000, and a transaction on Bitcoin is going to be as rare and special as chartering an oil tanker. Like, just absolutely delusional takes.
Yeah, absolutely. I
And
mean, yeah, of course,
absolutely
and
not. No,
it's
what's
absolutely
going to happen is they're
delusional.
going to switch to a spreadsheet. All the people that have to pay those fees are going to switch
Well,
to a
yeah,
spreadsheet
that's
and not
exactly
use your
what they did.
blockchain. Um,
Yeah, this is what we were joking about. It's maybe not even a spreadsheet. It's just a piece of paper
yeah.
on Michael Saylor's desk where it's
Yes,
just
yes.
you just.
And the same is exactly true of any use case that can technically be done on Bitcoin Cash covenants, but are absurd to do in Bitcoin Cash covenants, right? If it requires 20 megabytes of transactions to run one zero knowledge proof, you're not actually going to do that. Like you might do it for demo purposes. Like I might do it just to prove to everybody I'm smart enough to write a zero conf proof in this system, and I can make it work. Look, I code golfed it, guys. But like, no, it doesn't actually matter. It doesn't move the needle for anybody on the network. If the per transaction cost is absurd, I have done nothing but prove to you that I can do it. It doesn't translate into real use. Real users aren't going to spend $20 or $50 or whatever it is per transaction. Um, Instead, we want to find ways to make more and more use cases really reasonable on Bitcoin Cash so that people actually
Yeah,
want to do
that
them.
makes a lot of sense to me. So yeah, but so is that what you're saying? So that without OP Eval, that the things that it would make possible, they're really is taking like several orders of magnitude of data down. Is that the case?
Yes, and
Because
same, yeah, both
okay,
OP Eval because you have to understand there are two things that are kind of are huge limiters right now. One is function application, and the other is loops. And technically, we could say that it's actually just function application because you can always do recursive functions, right? So, and we can recurse down to 100, a depth of 100 in our current VM limit system, no problem. It's no issue at all. Already handled by the VM limits. But loops are also like 25% more efficient for a vast majority of cases. So it would be kind of silly to have OP-eval without also adding loops. Um, the inverse is also technically true. It's technically possible to refactor a program to specify the program as a giant set or series of loops. Um, where you effectively activate and deactivate different sections of the code at just the right moment to get it to do the things you want it to do as if you had function application. Like, I think it is technically possible to say that they're equivalent, but like, that's ridiculous. You should just have function application too. We wouldn't even be talking about what you can get away with in a programming language if we weren't starting with a severely reduced programming language. So yes, it is useful to have both function application and loops for different reasons in different cases. In each case, one is going to be much more optimal than the other. Anything you can express as a loop is something around 20 to 30% more efficient to do with the loop. Um, and then it would be hard to even do it would be hard to even give you a percentage for the reverse, where if you tried to specify the program as a giant loop and then activate and deactivate conditionals and the right, you have to know exactly how many code branches your problem has and how many times you're going to hit that part of the loop and where you're going to put stuff. And by the way, you also need a compiler that's smart enough to produce these programs, and I don't know who you plan on making that. But it's hard to do just by hand. And I'm not even completely certain that it's possible to say it's always possible. It's totally conjecture, but I think it's always possible to
yeah.
specify it that way. It's just ridiculous. It would be very silly to do it that way. Um,
Yeah, so when looking at like out of the three chips that you propose, I believe in the yeah no all in no, December, sorry, Loops is the one that seems, from what I've seen in the developer chats, this one seems to have absolutely the majority of the support, that this is like a really something that can be really beneficial to BCH. The risk reward is very nicely balanced. One thing that interests me, and I didn't see an answer to this, is the chip. And unless I've written it down wrong, but the chip is 2021-05. So it's dated 3 years before the other two. So yeah, is there a reason, like, why was this left untouched for so long? Why has it just been picked up and now and proposed for the upgrade?
Yeah, it was waiting on limits. All of this stuff was waiting on a reasonable solution to limits. Our limits were this, implicitly defined by magic constants and encoding sizes, and now they're explicit. And so,
Right.
it's possible for us to actually go all the way back to Mike Hearn's comment there. He said it very well in 2011. Like we are certain that the system is safe as it exists today. If you change anything about the behavior of the system, you have essentially thrown away all of those guarantees. Um, and the most applicable upgrade to 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 point at that to compare um, to that statement is the VM limits upgrade. The VM limits upgrade, by necessity, it's not possible to fix them without necessarily exposing yourself to throwing away all of the security guarantees of what we had before. To be very clear, the mountain to get over was VM limits, and it took 3 years. And that's just 3 years that the chip after the chip was proposed. And in practice, it took me all of last year, literally all of last year, and several other people reviewing very carefully many times. Um, uh, and that's just the chip. Before then, we have another decade of people looking at this problem, right? From 2011 to 2021, there's a big gap. There's a whole decade gap between when Mike Hearn says that any change to this necessarily throws away our security guarantees, necessarily throws away our safety guarantees rather. Um, uh, so you have to, there's we had a decade of thinking about it, if you will, before that chip was proposed, and then the chip also in 2021 uh, was maybe 50% of the way there, but all of the work was in the last 20%. And that was a lot of last year's work. So yeah, the 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 huge risky thing always is going to be modifying how the virtual machine applies limits. That that is the uh, that is the underlying concern in Mike Hearn's comment there. It was the underlying concern in why anytime anybody's like, why can't we just have loops? Like it doesn't change anything if I do a loop versus copying and pasting the code 10 times. Like, can't we just do loops that let you loop 10 times and that'd be fine? But the answer was always, well, yes, but actually our limits are all implicitly defined and based on based on magic constants and transaction encoding. So even if you did it that way, you get these unpredictable spikes in the worst case in places that are hard to even reason about. And so in practice, the answer is just like, no, we probably can't do that, not unless we do something more reasonable for our limits. Um, and so a lot of contract designers have, obviously, it's like the first thing you're going to encounter if you're doing anything non-trivial is that you can't like do the same thing 3 times. Like, you can't check the number of inputs and do the same thing across those 3 inputs. Um, like uh, so a lot of contract authors um, have direct real world experience where they have already had issues with loop with not having loops. I'd say the op eval. I think a lot of contract authors are a little bit insulated from the issue because they're using cache script, and cache script lets them not really think too much about what's coming out the other end of the system. So it's easy for them to not really notice that, hey, my compiled transaction has 80% of the code in my compiled transaction is just copy pasted stuff. um, and not just for loops. It's for if you do need to do a certain kind of transformation in two different spots or two different code paths that don't necessarily take place one after the other. That you can't rearrange how you use the stack to turn them into a loop. It's just programs use functions. So yeah, I would say that's why you see almost anyone who's worked at all with with contracts is going to notice it's the first thing they have to learn about Bitcoin Cash's virtual machine system is that it doesn't have loops because they need them and they don't get them, so they have to work around that.
Yeah, sure.
Or in some cases
As
they
you
just
say,
don't.
yeah, and as you say, like, who would no one would program in that if it wasn't this amazing thing of money. So it's this wasn't created because it was a great design choice from a coding perspective, and I appreciate that. And it's also interesting. So I was aware that the upgrade this year that allowed then further chips to come on, but it's yeah, that now makes sense that's why Loops was parked up until now. It's actually a great time. I don't know if you're aware of this. So we're actually using cash tokens on Fiendish and Friends, the technology that you made possible with your chip. And there's a token called the Emerald token, which you can actually use for having a Fiendish shout out. And I think this Fiendish shout out is well timed. Just thinking about that particular upgrade, which is coming this May. I've lost it now. There you are. Builder, entrepreneur, or Freedom Cash fan. Tickets for BCH Bliss are on sale now. Check out www.bliss.cash/2025. You can get the tickets on tapswap .cash. Yeah, so this is for everyone that's listening. BCH Bliss conference in May. We're going to be so you've got a lot of builders coming there, and this is planned actually around the virtual machine limit upgrades and big int. So the chips are going on to mainnet, and allows then the chips that Jason is talking about to be possible, right? To even be able to be implemented onto Bitcoin Cash if it passes through the consensus model, and there's a general consensus that these chips add enough value to the ecosystem to warrant actually putting it in. So, Jason, just to sort of branch off a little bit, just quickly on that note, these are your chips that are being upgraded. The conference is a celebration of that, and while also showcasing the building that's going on in the ecosystem. Peter Rison's also there joining to talk about his hardware and scaling with UTXO. Is there any chance we'll be seeing yourself at Bliss this May?
I hope I can make it. I might not be able to, but I hope I can make it somehow. Maybe digital.
Okay. Digital would be okay. We could accept this. If you do turn up, I promise you at least one beer is on me. So that's a pretty big offer. Yeah.
Okay.
But
Well, I'll
no,
think hard about
first
it
round's
now.
on me. It'd be great because yeah, we I don't think we definitely haven't met in person. But it'd be lovely, if you could join. So I was there last year, and I think like all the other builders that were there, it was a tremendous experience. So if something happens and you can make it to come, then you'll be, of course, as you already know, very, very warmly welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, and I'm glad to see it glad to see it happening. It's exciting to see the conferences beginning again, sort of in the Bitcoin
Yes.
space.
Yeah, definitely. It's important. We can uh, sit at home and we can code and try and make the world better from our bedrooms or from our computer. But the really important thing of Bitcoin Cash is also getting out there, meeting each other, and forming enterprises. This is what I always find interesting is you've done a lot of work for helping the chain and developing the chain and making it so that more things are possible on the chain. And I think with these sort of conferences, is a chance for actually people to come together, the developers, but also then the entrepreneurs. In okay, how do we leverage this to make our business, to make something profitable, to make something that we can then grow the network even more? And this is the thing that excites me. Yeah, but I guess this is the working together with entrepreneurs to build products and apps. I guess this isn't your thing, Jason.
I've been focused on protocol improvements that I consider pretty foundational, but I'm actually very excited. I'm certainly a little burned out on protocol things, and I'm excited to be spending more of my year on software that I can ship myself and don't have to don't have to advocate for so much.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
can imagine.
Bitoff ID, LiveAuth, Chain Graph are all getting a lot more attention from me already
Very
this
cool.
month and the rest of this year for sure.
Okay. Well, and what about
And I should
JEDECs?
say, if I can also mention also that like um, in some ways that's why the TXV5 chip looks the way it does. The TXV5 chip includes a lot of things that are in some cases, have been my notes for like the better part of a decade, and I wanted to make sure that I got them specified somewhere where we can kind of serve a little bit as as a checkpoint for uh, if we could um, deploy a new transaction format. This is what I think it would look like this year, and so I've posted in a few spots. I answered some questions on Twitter yesterday, but I don't see the TXV5 chip being a good idea to deploy in 2027 unless Bitcoin Cash has made it back into at least the top 10 cryptocurrencies. Because and the way I put it yesterday and have put it before is that a transaction format version is very very hard to do because it's a natural bottleneck for a lot more ecosystem players. Like these 2026 chips essentially just they require only node upgrades. So they're kind of the least the lowest cost and lowest risk kind of upgrade. And they have and so their risk return ratio is a lot higher, whereas a transaction format upgrade is really disruptive. I have done a lot of review before on specifically what software would be broken by the PNV3 upgrade actually in 2021, and I was a little surprised actually at how few wallets actually consume the transaction format. There are very few wallets out there that are decoding transactions. Um, Most of them are asking their backend servers for UTXOs directly, and they're coming back in JSON format or something like that. And so, in practice, what we might assume would be breaking with the transaction format is not quite as breaking as as we might otherwise assume. But in general, transaction format upgrades are really disruptive, and they're a natural place where any company that's got like just kind of has a Bitcoin Cash integration in their block explorer software or something like that, and it works with Bitcoin Cash right now, but if the transaction format was changed, like they would just as likely remove Bitcoin Cash support rather than doing even if it's just a little bit of work, rather than doing the work to fix the new part of whatever transaction format is
Yeah.
changed. So that is just a problem of being relatively small. No one is dropping Ethereum over Ethereum upgrades. They might be dropping Ethereum, but it's certainly not because of a transaction, some minor improvement or minor change in how a transaction is encoded. Um, Dropping Ethereum requires if they're making a different strategy for how their business operates, right? And my hope is that at some point, Bitcoin Cash will be there. That Bitcoin Cash will be in a position to deploy a transaction format upgrade. And if that were the case, I hope that this chip will have aged like wine
Okay.
till that
But that's
point. But we'll
That's
see.
it's a
Um,
nice. So it's basically, it sounds like this is a little bit of a present for the community while you sort of take a break and hoping, just during this episode, Bitcoin Cash has risen actually like seven to $10. So maybe we'll be back in the top 10 by the time we finish, right? If we carry on like that. But yeah, but you've got something in your mind that this is really only when the ecosystem is willing to swallow the effort and pain of making a change to the transactions, which makes sense. What interests me was like some of the other chips, they seemed much more specific and smaller. maybe not in the scope of what it actually enables, but actually, in the format. Whereas this chip, you've got multiple different aspects. You've got the zero overhead covenants, detached signatures, fractional satoshis, and there was, I heard some groans from developers like, Jesus, this is an omnibus, the Bible of chips, and just raising an eyebrow at that. So, from your perspective, like, why have all these bundled together? Is it that they're linked? Is it just for you for the amount of effort, or is there a reason why they couldn't have just been broken up into separate chips?
um, yeah, and so some of that is definitely justified. This could be three chips. There are two other components that are very reasonably broken into a separate chip. I'm not interested in proposing them right now. The 2026 chips are definitely the 80% of the value for 20% of the work. So the chips that I proposed for 2026, the ones that I proposed in December are the ones that I think get us a huge amount of value uh, for very safe, very contained, and demonstrably will stand the test of time uh, changes. The 2027s, the stuff in that 2027 proposal, the transaction format proposal, are things that uh, most of the transaction format changes really truly just improve the compression of transactions a little bit. Like they're a 20% improvement versus op eval and loops are a 1,000 or 10,000x improvement. And so
Okay, and
they
by the way,
it's not even
just
reasonable to compare them in how irrelevant the differences are in some of the transaction encoding stuff versus op eval or loops.
sure.
And so
I hear that, and this is also kind of interesting for me. I'm more of from the pragmatic side. Is so what I hear is, to implement this, it requires really like some swallowing of from all the other stakeholders, because they have to, it breaks basically everything
yeah.
for very little. I have to say, if I wanted to go out and selling this, I wouldn't take you.
Yeah, no, it's something that we should have. It's important, but it's definitely not urgent. And there are a couple with a couple exceptions inside there. That there's read-only inputs are a backwards, could be implemented as a very isolated, tight, backwards compatible thing. They're definitely not as important as the stuff I proposed for 2026. That's why it's in the 2027 stuff, and the 2027 stuff is sort of like, and this is stuff that's on the horizon that I'd like to start the conversation for, but am I definitely don't consider to be important enough to draw attention away from the stuff that I proposed for 2026. Like, if there's anything that's worth spending your brain power working on, it's the 1,000x and 10,000x improvements you get out of the 2026 stuff. Um, the read-only inputs are, so I would say you could break the 2027 stuff. You could break it into three chips. The read-only inputs can be a very isolated thing, and they're a big chunk of the value in that chip also. Like um, they would allow us to get to the zero overhead covenants. Um, I I wouldn't necessarily even be against trying to make that happen in 2026, but I consider it to be a lot less certain than loops and eval and P2S, simply
Yep.
because like loops and eval and P2S, there really is just not a lot of space for bike shedding. Like there's a correct way to implement loops in the fourth programming language, and it's been around for 50 years. Like you can ask a large language model to, like as I mentioned earlier, to implement your program using op begin op until, and it will do it right. Like it would be really hard to justify inventing our own thing for loops. And in the same way, op eval does the simplest thing, as we said before, it does the simplest thing possible that we can prove will never be uh, will never become outdated by a new a new clever way of approaching the op eval problem. Like it will always be, and we can prove it will always be the most efficient way to take one item from the stack and evaluate it. So it's always the most efficient way to do a single function call or the last call of a particular function. Um, so it's one of this. It's the one approach that we can be certain would stand the test of time versus something that we tried to kind of invent ourselves, if you will. And then the P2S stuff, similarly, is quite literally unifying three limits so that they are logically consistent. Like they're right now they're not logically consistent, and so
Huh.
all of those to me feel like much more obvious things than anything that I kind of put in the TXV5 stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
and the TXV5 stuff, quite honestly, in a lot of ways, is like I don't have it in me to break those out and like try to champion them and start the
Sure.
process. Like they, I think everything in there are the correct ideas, and they're the things we should probably be talking about for the problems they address. Um, Read-only inputs could be its own thing, and then the bytecode limits could be their own thing. Everything else actually does have to be its own chip. It does have to be one transaction format upgrade. And that is just the nature of a transaction format upgrade. Like it is necessarily an omnibus bill. You can't just kind of break the transaction format. If you're gonna trim all of the dead weight from the transaction format, you should get it all right the first time.
Yeah. Sure.
And
So I mean, for me,
that's what the rest of the chip is.
like for me, like again, this is just looking at the pragmatities of Bitcoin Cash today. So the transaction on chain transactions are relatively stable now since the end of the bear market. So 2023, of course, there's some spikes of particular use cases that of testing of new software, but the baseline is pretty standard. So basically right now I'd say Bitcoin Cash, the where I can imagine this would be useful is for example, if we do end up with the zero knowledge proof, so that you can have, as you were put it nicely, like the Monero, like, or potentially even better, you can have some modern security privacy layers on Bitcoin Cash. And maybe this would generate a lot of transactions theoretically. And for example, if that was to happen and BCH was to cannibalize the entire dark market usage, and Monero, for example, users would use Bitcoin Cash, and we're seeing, okay, there's a real, like, this is being used. And then the one I understand, this chip is, okay, if we were to implement this, we get to say, I don't know, but I would imagine, whether it's 20% or 30% on that transaction size, so that we can end up having more throughput, and still stay on the course to being a world used currency, even with those particular covenants being used. Is
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd go further a little bit of my intention of like just kind of getting it all in one technical spec, all the things we need to clean up to be able to literally put a Bitcoin Cash zero knowledge proof covenant transaction side by side with a Zcash shielded transaction and compare them in byte length and demonstrate that the Bitcoin Cash transaction is the same length or shorter than the Zcash transaction. And my intention is to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that that's possible, to just dispel the idea that you need layer one consensus upgrades to add privacy. You don't. I I wanted to get that in a technical spec so that I could point to exactly what changes we would need to make to shave off every single byte um, required to put those next to each other and say, yes, we can do Zcash on Bitcoin Cash at no bandwidth cost. Um, at no additional bandwidth cost, and actually, as I mentioned in a few places in the chip too, there are real advantages to doing it at a user layer where users can deploy their own protocols. They can deploy covenants that implement a new protocol because there are bleeding edge ideas in a lot of these zero knowledge proof uh, fields where a layer one network simply cannot deploy something that is a white paper that came out 3 weeks ago. Bitcoin Cash would be able to deploy it, and people would be able to use it with $10, and it would be fine if it broke. It wouldn't jeopardize the network, and it would bring um, like university teams that are working on these things, or new companies that have, they're coming from the math side of the academic world. They're coming from the zero knowledge proof academic world, and they're wanting to turn their ideas into a product, that is usable on a real cryptocurrency. I think Bitcoin Cash could be a an ideal target for them to essentially publish their white paper with a proof in. I think there's certainly a future possible in the next few years where novel zero knowledge proof constructions are first demonstrated on Bitcoin Cash. And because our VM will be capable of it, and it's actually unique to Bitcoin Cash, because Ethereum, it would be completely unreasonable to try to implement these things in Ethereum because of the transaction fees, because Ethereum has this kind of 1000x or worse scaling disadvantage versus Bitcoin Cash, and there's no way to fix that. That's an architectural problem.
Yeah.
To fix that, you need to make it look like Bitcoin Cash.
Yeah,
So
which I think is which I think is such an important point, right? So, and it's why, I love what you're doing. I think it's important with the vision, and it's why I'm with Bitcoin Cash, is because technically, it's built for the future. Technically, it's built for mass usage, um, and also, but it's also on the flip side of that, the build it and they will come thing, is clearly not true, right? Because Ethereum they've got this something, that's not as scalable, but it's being massively used. Bitcoin Cash has this amazing ecosystem that's massively more scalable, and it's used, a fraction of that, which is where, for me, it's important to get that balance of basically where the resources are put, where the effort is put in the ecosystem, to make sure that users are growing. But before, we've got a few more things I'd love to talk about. I've got a final Fiendish shout out here, from Bruno. Get a bunch of self-licensed cypherpunks working on your privacy at Aria VPN _net. It's a strict no logs policy, zero knowledge architecture VPN provider, not in any of the 14 I countries. BCH zero conf and XMR only. $30 for a whole year plan. Business solutions available. So go and grab your VPN paid with BCH or Monero. So, yeah, this is Jason. And the intention of this, by the way, is to get transactions going, because people can actually pay with tokens on Bitcoin Cash, and they send it, and it just basically just goes around in a flow, between essentially my wallet and Cauldron Dex, is to encourage people to actually use the tokens and use Bitcoin Cash. So, I mean, have you got any ideas on that yourself? Like, where do you see the big growth coming from in Bitcoin Cash over the next, in the short to midterm?
I would say that all of the important work to be done there is actually on the entrepreneurs, and specific products side. I've spent a lot of time on these protocol upgrades, because they're very foundational, and they unlock a lot of possible entrepreneurship. But yes, I am personally very excited to not be working on protocol upgrades. So I'm quite done. And as I, kicking out the TX5 stuff, probably indicated. Um, I Yeah, I will personally be working on chain graph and liboth, or uh, tooling to make kind of advanced wallet development easier, and more advanced decentralized applications, decentralized applications that you can use in across multiple wallets. I think that's a big field that Bitcoin Cash is uniquely well positioned to kind of conquer. Whereas in Ethereum and these other ecosystems, like most of the world is kind of based around everybody just builds their app and a website and pretends it's decentralized. So I think that there's some some unique advantages in how Bitcoin Cash works, that are just going to require a lot of more development and work, to uh, to make them really make them into practical products that people can use. But
Yeah,
um, I won't pretend to be good at identifying which specific entrepreneurial ideas are going to rise in the marketplace, and who's going to make it happen. Because I mean,
fair enough.
ultimately in practice, it's the individuals that are building these companies and products that are going to make all the difference. And so
Exactly.
the goal of any of this protocol upgrade stuff is basically just to make sure that we've fully gotten out of their way, that the silly things that are kind of just, you know, historical baggage in the protocol, where with in the case of limits, we kind of, Satoshi basically kind of patched stuff up real quick, duct taped some stuff, and then left. And we've dealt with that for quite some time. Getting that kind of in a better spot where people can use
It's
contracts to
and
kind of the
hasn't it got it
extent
in
they
a better
expect.
spot? The thing, everyone is in the community is quite well aware of how BTCers look down on Bitcoin Cash and like to, joke about every aspect of it. But that's changed quite a lot recently when it comes to the development and tooling that's happening on Bitcoin Cash. I guess you've seen this on Twitter, and yeah, this is definitely an interesting change. So people are becoming more aware, in the ecosystem, in the wider ecosystem, outside of Bitcoin Cash, most importantly, that okay, things are cooking here. Like these guys are really improving. This isn't just bigger blocks, because that's what most people think, right? Bitcoin Cash is just
Yeah.
Bitcoin with bigger blocks. Well, not anymore.
Yeah, yeah, I'm excited to especially this next couple of years are going to be exciting. 'Cause some of this stuff, as we've seen with cash tokens, it took more than a year to get some of the software in place. Even though we had patches for a block explorer and patches for a wallet or two, before activation. It's just really hard to speculatively work on products that rely on a consensus upgrade, until it's locked in, at least locked in, and in practice, a lot of companies are still going to be uncertain until after May 15th, because that's what they've come to expect from the wider, specifically the wider Bitcoin ecosystem, but also just all
Oh,
cryptocurrencies. Like you don't know it's going to be stable ground until it's for sure there. And you can't waste your company's resources, um, building for something that might not ever work. Um, so having the kind of protocol upgrades actually live and working, is a necessary prerequisite for the kinds of efforts that are, a year long technical development effort, producing a product that is that could really could really improve our bottom line on that layer one usage that we were talking about.
yeah,
So
sure.
and
One of the
there are
ideas.
what's that?
Sorry, you said. I mean, you say you're not an entrepreneur, but you've come up with some nice ideas that could, at the very least, be used by entrepreneurs. And one of the, prediction markets, which we're seeing, to some degree with BCH Guru, although, the prediction markets, as I understood you had in mind, and the thing that really interests me is wider than that. So, to actually start sort of
Yep.
validating truth, or what is the truth, or putting some money behind actually what the truth is, and which is very interesting. But one of the things you had was JDEX, which saw a lot of opportunity here, for people to very easily sell their tickets, and set up basically a system where they can distribute and set up their own exchange for just pennies. Is that something that's been parked? Is it shelved now, or is it something that is potentially, you would continue working on at some point?
Yeah, certainly. It's No, everything was parked except for VM limits for essentially all of 2024. So as far as my personal my personal development schedule, including basically nothing other than VM limits. In fact, my real life schedule included almost nothing but VM limits last year. But but
By the way, which thank you. You know, really, it's very highly appreciated. All of your work in the ecosystem.
thanks. But yeah, so 2025, I'm definitely excited to be working on more essentially just uh, direct products. And I have a lot of work to do in chain graph, and I have a lot of work to do in liboth, the JavaScript library. To make some of these things that are, until now have been kind of demos, to make them really practical and easy to implement in wallets, and easy to kind of copy templates between wallets and just run it. Yeah, there's some very exciting stuff to be done there, and I'll be working on that. And at some point when that stuff's good enough, then actually the JetX template from 2022 will just work. So in any wallet that implements the wallet template stuff. So the design of that is 80% of the work done, and with big int, the last 20% is simply removed. You
Oh,
you don't need it.
sounds
So
good.
yeah, so the 2022 implementation is actually already fully optimized and ready to go. But getting from a theoretical protocol spec like that to something where you click a button in a wallet and it actually works, that's a lot of work, and it's not just like tooling work, but also there's some entrepreneurship there of like
Sure.
getting wallets in the hands of users that are wanting to use it in that way. um, so yeah, I definitely expect to work on the wallet engine in liboth over the next you know into the future indefinitely, now, and when that is um, sufficiently capable, it will be possible for it to just execute the JetX template from 2022. So yeah, anyways, for JetX specifically is as done as it can get until you get to the wallet integration side, and then there's a lot of wallet integration tooling work to be done, and I'm working on that now. So yeah, we'll see.
Fantastic. That's what we want to hear. Because I mean, this is the thing that I think it is clear in Bitcoin Cash is the entrepreneur side. This is the people that have got the eye or the resources to to use what's there. All of the possibilities on the chain, all of the work, all the groundwork that you've set out already on the main chain to then extract value, or rather, well, offer value, right? From the chain. And but because there's always the things coming up, how to get Bitcoin Cash used more. We need more marketing, and it's like, well, my question is, well, who's going to pay for that? Whereas, of course, you have entrepreneurs selling their product or service, then they're paying for the marketing, and they're financially incentivized to do that. I think the biggest Bitcoin Cash marketers that I see are general protocols. But you see the Any Hedge comics going out. You see, always something, and because they're marketing their product, and I think this is the greatest way that we'll see Bitcoin Cash use grow, is through that. So I'd love to see more entrepreneurship in the ecosystem, and what I think is really important, because as a non-developer, it's and also, I think it's just also someone that's not got a business that's running on the Bitcoin Cash like directly, is is to make sure that the chips that put in are actually based on economical need. Um, because when you have entrepreneurs that are building things, then of course, then that feedback, the mix between entrepreneurs, their needs for business that is really utilizing BCH as money and everything that it offers. um that's actually a direct economical factor of, hey, this has a reason why it should be adapted, because by adapting this, it allows my business to be even bigger and grow faster, and use the chain even more than it's being used today. And that's what I'd love to see, just to make sure that this balance this balance is there because you're clearly an incredibly smart person and you're looking very far into the future. Um, but nothing beats cold hard reality of what's actually happening today. You know how people are using things. I think is a sort of feedback mechanism, which I guess we could do a bit more of today.
Yeah, a lot of very smart people have been completely ruined by Mr. Market. So, so
Yeah,
yes, I definitely agree. I'm excited to see lots of Bitcoin Cash companies um, uh, doing building more and more products that are sort of unique to Bitcoin Cash, like, and especially like token related products where you need both good token support, reasonable contracting capabilities, and pretty low transaction fees. And that's actually a mix you can't really get anywhere else. You can kind of get it a little bit on Solana right now, um, but certainly not at the scale and um, well, yeah, not at the scale that Bitcoin Cash could offer it. So
yeah.
scale and transaction fee, reliability, like transactions that don't get canceled. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
and I guess also decentralized. But yeah, anyhow, yeah, so I'm very excited to see that stuff happening, and hopefully to contribute a little bit more of it myself over
Yeah,
the
from
coming
that
years.
side, yeah, of
I've
course.
spent a lot of time on basically making our programming language support loops and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really everyone expected after getting the lock in November. Everyone expected, and certainly I did, that we won't be seeing much of Jason now for a while. He'll, whether it's going to be 5 months or 6 months, I'm sure he's gonna just calm down a bit and. Just a few weeks later, whoa! there's
Yeah.
three new chips. No peace with the wicked. So I think you definitely deserve a break. I can imagine that the many developers in the community that go through these chips and really pick them apart, they also will be happy with a break. I think it's exciting. I think it's really great to have more ideas than we need and to be able to pick the best ones and throw away, more. I think that's great. But what I also, as we've said, I think the stage right. So one of the chips, and I know you've mentioned it, and you said, hey, we have to be in the top 10 and so forth. But one of the parts of the new chip that you sort of that you announced, was it just yesterday? Um,
2 days ago, I don't know.
2 days ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
The
mean, this talk being a good forcing function, be like, I should probably get that out. All right.
Yeah, 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 and it's great, and I love the reaction it creates in the community. It sort of gives I think quite a high signal of how you're regarded, and people are excited, about what's possible and what can be done, and how we're going to improve this chain, which is why it's such an exciting chain to work at because people want it to see it. We want it to be the best money that will ever exist. And one of the things that fractional satoshis. I looked at this and I saw some people going, "Yeah, yeah, well, this is something we need." I have to admit, I laughed and I thought, "Wow, you're bullish. you're really bullish." Fractional satoshis. There's 100 million satoshis in a Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash. So you're already planning for 8 billion people using this and transacting everything on this. So I mean, yeah. So just I mean,
It's a
I guess
problem we should have a good answer for when it rises.
yeah,
It
sure.
would be good for it to for us to have argued about it a little bit here in 2025. And again, there have also been other proposals in the past couple of years, and then there are some proposals from kind of 2013 era. And I just wanted to kind of get on paper what I consider to be a pretty uh, straightforward solution that optimizes the things that matter to optimize, um,
Okay.
and some rationale for it. So that conversation can be brewing for some time. But yeah, certainly fractional satoshis are not urgent. If anything, fractional cash tokens are much
Yes.
more urgent in that there are
Sure.
lots of use cases that there is a a plausible concern that you wouldn't quite have enough precision with what cash tokens offer right now, because cash tokens essentially offer the same precision as satoshis, and by design that was intentional to make sure that whatever we did with fractional satoshis would do the same. We do the same thing with fractional cash tokens, but uh, the um, Yeah, I can certainly see fractional cash tokens becoming relevant even a little bit before the fractional satoshis. But then there's also, if we had a huge uh, uptick and increase in layer one volume, there's a chance that fractional satoshis would be useful essentially just for specifying transaction fees. That's kind of the primary use, anyways, in the much longer term. But there are, and the chip talks a little bit about, today's largest financial markets use tick sizes that aren't quite representable. If you don't have a little bit better division. So yeah, you can look at the rationale there, but I'm glad to be sort of done with that for a while.
For a while. Let's see. I can kind of
Yeah,
imagine, 1 or 2 months, you'd be like, oh shit, I'm bored. I'm coming back. let's
no,
roll
I'm
up the sleeves and get cracking.
yeah, I'll continue. I want to continue like clarifying rationale and stuff like that for all of these. But yeah, to be super clear, the 2026 stuff is stuff that um, I think is far potentially far less controversial and far more straightforward, like things that um, I have easy proofs that they will stand the test of time versus the stuff that I didn't try to propose for 2026 is the stuff that I can't easily prove is going to be the optimal design or has design decisions that are kind of subjective or that it's possible that we might uh, come up later with a slightly better way of doing something. Um, versus the 2026 stuff is essentially all sort of, in some ways, sort of ancient tech, but also just timeless things like the loops and OP Eval are like you're not going to do better than taking one thing from the stack and evaluating it versus doing something more clever. Um, so yeah, I'm hopeful that I'm interested in the continued review of the 2026 stuff, and I'm going to keep working on tooling to make it very useful in end user wallets, because that's where I plan to spend my time for much of this year. But
Fantastic.
but yeah, and I'm excited that there's already a lot of interest, obviously, in the loop stuff. I think the op
Yes.
eval was certainly surprising uh, because again, very few people are exposed to function application in their contract design because they're using cash script and they just kind of ignore what comes out the other end in a lot of cases. Like you put in the cash script and you get whatever it comes out and if you disassemble it and consider how you might make it more efficient, um, you would find that there's some obvious places where a function application would cut 50% of your transaction size or something. But most people are not exposed to that problem because it doesn't show up at the cache script side where you need a construct to pretend that you have loops.
Yeah, sure.
Um, and the
Well,
same is true of the POS stuff. But
if it's okay with you, so Emergent, so John Neary from General Protocols, he would love to, yeah, say something. So yeah, John, you've got the mic.
Hey, I just wanted to make sure that it's clear that I completely disagree with Fiendish's point that it's okay to take a break. No breaks. It's and and if I know Jason, probably his brain, if there's something important to be done, it's not gonna let him take a break anyway.
Listen,
Yeah.
I was playing the long game. Jesus, you just spoiled my game, John. And of course
No,
I was
no,
lying. Of course he's not allowed to take a break, but we
no.
can't say that out loud, man.
But I wanted to say something
Thanks.
also actually constructive. So about the topic, Jason was saying that it's really important to develop. It doesn't matter, as we've been saying for several years now at GP. It doesn't matter how much power your chain has if it's not accessible to developers and users. And so that's the whole concept of the native wallet. And as long as we've been working and thinking and conceptualizing about it, Jason's been conceptualizing about it even longer, right? Like he's had this code out for, what is it, like 8 years or 10 years? Like the CLI wallet. Anyway,
I'd
he's
have
been
to
working
think
on it for a
20,
very long time because he also,
2018.
I
Yeah.
think it was 2018, right? Yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
thought.
it was the earliest
So
stuff. I don't
yeah,
know, maybe
I
20.
have that. I
Yeah.
have some videos of it. Yeah. So yeah, we totally agree with that. And I was also in the process of writing an email to invite Jason to our internal. We have a like a biweekly meeting we call Exo Connect, right? Because that's our attempt at the native wallet concept. And so I'd really like. I'm really hoping Jason will join us at Exo Connect and have us hash out some of these issues where we've got the concepts, and then now it's time to like really make the rubber meet the road and actually put these things out in people's hands. And so there's a lot of little details to iron out, and we'd love to have you on, Jason. So I hope you'll join us.
Sweet. Yeah, I'd be happy to have. Don't know how much I can commit to, but I can for sure. It'd be fun to get together a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, thanks for the time. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
You're more than welcome. Thank you, Jason, so much for coming on. So yeah, I promised not to take too much more of your time than an hour and a half. So I think that's a good point just to sort of wrap things up. So yeah, thanks again, Jason, for your time. It's been really humbling to have you on the show today, and an absolute pleasure. Can't stress enough. Appreciate all your work that you've done in making decentralized sound money a reality. And yeah, and all of this, it's an important mission, and separating money from the state is something that is going to transform money more than anything that's happened ever before in human history. And I believe that we're on the right path to reach that, and that's through your help and work. So thank you.
Amen, and thank you. And I'll try not to let that other stuff go to my head either.
You can let it go to your head, and then so when you want to take your break, you're like, "Shit, but I'm a god here. I can continue working."
No, ridiculous.
You see, that's the strategy. It's a good
No,
one. It's gonna work. I can
no,
feel it.
no. No, that's it. The TX5 is the last of the chip stuff I have in my backlog. That's I'm gonna go work on software now.
Good. All right, we'll let you off. We'll let you off, and we'll welcome you back when you manage to get back in. So, for all you listeners, make sure follow Jason on Twitter at bitjason, so JSON, to keep up with all of the BCH developments. See if he can manage this. See if he can go the rest of the year without chip proposals. I'm sure you can make a bet against this on BCH Guru, because I think there's going to be a lot of people that will take that bet. To be honest, let's see. Um, yeah, if you enjoyed the show and want to show your appreciation, please feel free to drop some BCH or a Fiendish token into the wallet. The address is in the comment at the start of the spaces. The next episode of Fiendish and Friends is again at 4 o'clock Central European time next Friday, and it's featuring Joshua Petty, aka Elon Moist, developer behind now defunct decentralized social media app Twitch, to talk about Bitcoin scaling and the future of P2P cash and cryptocurrencies. So great. Again, thanks for being here. And Jason, this was Fiendish and Friends. I wish you all a good morning, good day, and good night. Take care.